This episode is brought to you by Roundtable Group, the experts on experts. We've been connecting attorneys with experts for over 25 years. Find out more at roundtablegroup.com.
I'd like to welcome to my show today Dr. Richard Laton. He's the president and founder of Earth Forensics Incorporated and also an associate professor in the Department of Geological Sciences at Cal State University, Fullerton. If you could please give me just a couple moments, just introduce yourself, tell me about your background and how you started out as an expert witness.
I'm Dr. Laton. I'm a professor at California State University, Fullerton, as well as the principal owner of earthforensics.com. I did a lot of consulting for years, worked with a lot of different groups, and started working for a small group that actually did expert witness work, and really kind of saw how that could be the next step in my evolution of a career. And that is taking all the experience I had for years and years and years and actually applying it towards a problem in the litigation environment. And so I just kind of from there, took on a few things and just kind of ballooned into where it's essentially a full-time career, with teaching almost being my hobby.
Now, do you work a lot of just on the California, in the state of California, or you go across the nation?
My work has been completely across the nation for sure, including a little bit of stuff in Europe. Nothing in South America or Canada yet, but we'll work on that. Have done some professional talks as an expert witness in Asia, but it was for a different program. But yeah, so I am licensed in 15 states as a geologist and hydrogeologist. So I work all over the country. Cases from New York, Rhode Island to California, north and south from Texas to Montana. So.
Sure. Well, I mean, definitely out west, water is gold, and it's definitely going to continue to be a concern and an issue that everyone's going to have to work towards solutions in the coming decades, the coming century. Do you find that across, you talked about Europe, do you find that they have similar maybe water problems or geology problems like you do out west? Is it universal?
Well, I guess the one thing you're probably getting at is a water supply issue, which is certainly, even people in the Midwest have water supply issues. Georgia, I tell people when we had the Olympics in Atlanta, Georgia, the river they did the kayaking in is run dry for over a decade. It has no water in it. They couldn't have the Olympics if they wanted to. So water from a volume standpoint is always going to be an issue. And as another thing I tell my students, the people is, if it's a fixed amount of volume on Earth and the population keeps getting bigger, so that's not going to that means the stresses on her even more. But there's also the dirty water side of things, which is also prevalent worldwide, and that is we contaminated the water. Anything and everything we've done on the surface sooner or later works its way into the soils, into the ground, and into the water. Now, does that mean we can't treat it? Yeah, we can treat some of it. Some things we're finding are a little harder to treat than others. Some of those chemicals are going to be in the environment for virtually ever, like Teflon and PFAS. Others will break down naturally, but if they're in our water supply, we want to take care of them and treat them and clean them up. So I see a lot of my litigation support has been really dealing with where's the contamination that's harming my aquifer or my water supply, where'd it come from, who should we go after, or defending the people who did it and say, hey, we defended it, we did everything we could, but nature is going to do its own thing. So I've done both sides of that. But so there's basically a clean water and a dirty water supply, or a clean water and dirty water side of things. From the water supply thing, obviously California, we're putting a well in one place and stealing somebody's water, or someone complaining because I put in a $2 million system and it doesn't work like you said it might have worked. So you have to remind people that nature is going to be nature and she's going to do what she does. But yeah, so there's really two sides of it, and that's worldwide. Asia has huge amounts of water quality issues. They may not have so much a supply issue, but they certainly do have the water quality issues. And So that's something that's just going to be there forever. Hopefully we can get to a point where things are better, but I'm kind of the belief that today's water quality is the best it's ever going to be in the future.
Interesting. Now, when were you first retained as maybe an expert witness? Like, what type of matter was it for?
The first time I did it, well, I was under a professor who was an expert witness. And then as I was the person in the field doing all the sampling and everything, they had to call me in to testify about how I did it. And then maybe a decade or so after that, there was a case in California, contamination, where a large pharmaceutical company bought another company that had polluted this drinking water system. And so I became the expert for the plaintiffs, and they sued. We went to trial. We won parts of it, but not all of it. And really, that was the biggest learning experience I had, because that was the first one where I had to write expert reports, be deposed, write rebuttal reports, be deposed again, then go get ready for trial and go to trial. It was trial for 4 days. And after the depositions, which is really where most of the cases really come down to, I was just worn out. And it wasn't the best deposition I've ever had. Certainly, it was my first real one. And the lawyer came to me and goes, you have to make a decision. Do you want to continue doing this expert witness stuff, or do you just want to go back to consulting? And if you're going to do the expert witness stuff, that's fine. But what you're going to have to do is basically think about it in a different way than you had been before. And that is it isn't just who's the smartest person in the room. It's also who's the most knowledgeable about what's happening and what's going on, and sticking by your opinions, whatever they are. Other people may have a different opinion. That doesn't make yours wrong, doesn't make it right either, but you got to stick to it. And that advice that lawyer gave me has stuck with me ever since then, and really propelled me into doing this almost full time.
Wow. Have you seen or received other advice from attorneys that retain you as far as like tips or tricks of being an expert witness along the way?
Yeah, I mean, they all have their little things they talk to you about. Some of them are just there again, making sure to think about things before you speak, which as a teacher is really difficult to do. But also try to think, 2 moves ahead about where the other side may be headed you towards. And so you can either try to guide the topic to where you want it to be versus being guided to where they want you to go. Every deposition is somewhat different. Some are more combative. Others are trying to basically make, the other side's trying to become your friend. As my lawyer pointed out, he's really not your friend. But so they can kind of go, mean to very nice, but they're again always asking you these series of questions. And the other thing that was pointed out to me is I was always panicking about every single question. What's your name? Oh my God. What do you do for a living? And they said, these are just basic questions. You answer them every day. Just answer those. Don't hem haw. Just answer them directly and move on. And the more you hesitate, as soon as you hesitate, they got you. And so they said, just answer the question, move on. If you can answer it simply, there's nothing they can do to change it. But if you start to hesitate, they go, uh-oh, we got them.
Yeah.
And so that's been one of the things several lawyers have told me over the years. And then the other thing with doing expert witness work is you read a lot of depositions, not just yours, but others. And so from that, you get to learn how to phrase things, how to, maybe what some answers are better worded one way or another. It's the same answer, but if you say it one way, it means something different. Not being a lawyer, there's a bunch of lawyerese stuff in there that, I try not to learn, because they're, again, to them, it means something. To me, it means something different. So.
Yes. Now, let's see, we talked about kind of, initial part of being an expert witness and some learning experiences along the way. How many cases do you usually take on per year? Is it several where you have to balance your time management with them?
I do. And I have to manage my time 2 ways because I teach full time. and then I do this full time. And then, of course, research and other things in matter there, and family sooner or later in there. So I take on anywhere between 15 and 25 cases a year. Not all cases are equal. Some are just a little bit of work up front and then wait for a long time. Others, a lot of work up front, and then you kind of wait for a while. And so I find that number for a small group like myself, and I only have 2 employees besides myself, that basically keeps everybody busy, but doesn't overwhelm us. There are times I can't, where I get behind the 8 ball and there's a report due on Monday, one due on, the next Friday, and somewhere in there I have to have a deposition. So it can get hectic, but you just kind of work through things. I've never been afraid to work, and occasionally you do have to spend 24 hours trying to get something out the door.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. And then what about when you have your first initial interview with the client to understand what it is that they're looking for, or that meet and greet? How do you prepare yourself, or what are like maybe questions you ask the attorney?
There's 2, again, I break it up into 2 parts. One is they're giving me some heads up about what the case is. I might do a little research online, at least see if I understand something about it. Then there's the one where I don't know anything. And so the first thing to do is, obviously introduce myself, but then sit back and ask them, okay, what is the case about? What is your side of it? What are you thinking? And where do you see you need help? And sit back and listen. And as they're listening, you can start to go, okay, I can help them, or I can take part of that, but I'm not going to be able to do this other part, but it's okay. I have friends and other people who can do this other part. It's a small industry, so as always, one day one guy's on your side, next day they're against you. So, but really, I look at it as I want to be able to help them, and if I can't help them, or if they have an opinion that I can't back up, even on the very front side, I walk away. It's just not worth it to me, and that's happened. But if I think I can help them and they seem to have a reasonable approach to things, then I'll just keep asking more questions and try to dive in a little bit deeper until I get comfortable with what they're trying to ask for and what they're thinking about. Obviously, I can't give them an opinion because you haven't done any background work on it, but at least I can understand usually where they're headed. Particularly at this phase where I've been doing this basically for the last 15 years, pretty much full time, like I said, other than teaching. So I kind of have a better idea of where they may be headed because I've been down these various legal cases, both on defense and plaintiff side.
Sure. Now, when it comes to that initial interview, do you also know up front some of the deadlines? Do they give you a schedule?
I do ask them up front that anymore. Originally, I didn't ask that. It's never hurt me, but it certainly has put us in a bind. Now I kind of up front ask them, okay, so what type of time frame is there? What are you needing? Do you need an expert report, or you just need us to do a bunch of background work and then go do a deposition because it's in state court versus federal? Are you going to need me to do a site visit? Is it such a case I need to go to the site? If that site's not in California or not close by, then I got to get there. What's your time frame on that? When's discovery end?
Mhm.
Are we there again? Are we plaintiff or defense? Because that tells you what part of the system you got to be in as far as first shot over the bow or the second shot over the bow. But yeah, so early on I didn't do that. Now I do that a lot more. And it may be because I'm juggling more cases than I had before. But I think it's also something that gives me some expectations of what they're looking for. And therefore I can either tone them back down or say, hey, no problem. We got this. Let's move on.
What about the special contracts? As you kind of go through that initial interview, do you draft conditions into your contract?
It's not so much conditions, but I do have a retention letter. And 2 things. One time, sometimes the lawyers I'm working for have their own retention letter for experts, which I will receive, read through it, make sure there's nothing in there I can't live with, sign it, send back. Most of them anymore are asking for my retention letter, which is basically pretty simple. And that is hey, you are asking me or retaining me for this case, give them the case number, write down that I'm working for you, so everything goes through you. you're going to pay me on a certain time frame. Please sign this so I know I have like a legal contract to say, hey, at least you said you're going to pay me. I do not do retainers anymore. Originally, I kind of did, and I know people that do a retainer all the time. I have never been burned. Maybe some slow payment, but I've never been burned. And I'll keep my fingers crossed. But realistically, they have a problem, and my job is to help them. If I'm helping them, I expect to get paid for that. Yeah, it'd be nice. It's always on 30 days, but chances are it won't be. But nonetheless, I just feel like the contract side of it can get overdone. Really need something pretty simple. And also these contracts come up in deposition. So the simpler it is, the less argument about, oh, you were paid to have this exact opinion. No, I was paid to come up with opinion, So I think that also simplifies things as well.
Yeah. Now, if you could share some, like maybe some differences between Asia and Europe and the United States as far as the legal systems for me.
Well, a lot of it comes down to is the US EPA or the US usually is leading the rest of the world for contamination. We're the ones that say, 5 parts per million TC is bad, or 5 parts per billion is bad. And then what'll happen is the Asian countries will adopt that. So will Europe and whatnot. But once in a while, there's a few things where they're ahead of us, but typically not so much on the regulatory side of things. The biggest difference is we actually have people out trying to enforce things. And we also have private groups out there trying to go after things and find things and monitor things. Part of that being the Clean Water Act. And the fact is, if I'm a private citizen and I find something that someone's doing bad and they get fined $100,000, I get a reward for that. So there's still people doing that. The rest of the world, in Asia and other places, they just don't have the people doing the enforcement. They're really saying, okay, yeah, we know we have a pollution problem, but really we need the factory to hire people to go forward, and we'll worry about this later on. Europe is a little bit more progressive when it comes to that, but as you get to the edges of Europe, Eastern Bloc countries and stuff, they're going to go right back to the Asian model, which is, yeah, we have these standards, but we don't want to, we're not going to really enforce them. So from a legal standpoint, there's not as much work there to do. What's interesting is, from an expert witness standpoint, Asia and those Eastern Bloc countries, if you have a doctorate or a PhD, you're basically walk on water. Where in the US, we have lots of PhDs, so it isn't as, like we got a dime or a dozen of us here. So that is somewhat of an interesting thing when it comes to the legal side of it. They really want you and they really treat you like you're something special because of that doctor. We don't get necessarily that treatment here. Here, once you've gone through the process of being certified and all that good stuff, then it pretty much becomes pretty easy and not too much challenged. Everyone's always going to try to throw everyone out, but you go through those hoops. The Europe side of it, like I said, the stuff I've done over there has really been industry driven rather than regulatory driven, because they're, again, even though they have the rules, they just don't have the infrastructure of the people to go after them.
Interesting. What about the courts themselves? I mean, is there any like a formality? I mean, like in the US, you have to declare yourself as an expert witness or prove that you have this experience. Is there any certification about being an expert over there?
I'm certified in Europe. There is no certification that I'm aware of in Asia. There are a couple certifications that are just kind of, they work, but they're not really, I mean, they're like an association you stand for, but you have to do worldwide stuff, and so they say you're certified. The courts in Europe do have a little bit of vetting process for the expert. I did not see that in Asia. As far as South America goes, I don't know. I mean, what I've heard, they're probably similar to us, where you have a little bit of vetting going on. But it's really not the vetting process you see here.
Do you find that you take more federal cases?
Lately, it's probably been about 50-50. Federal and versus state. In California, it's probably 70% state and 30% federal. Outside the state, it's mostly all federal.
Okay.
A few states where there's some state stuff going on. So it really just depends on where you're at and how big the project is. There are some projects where they can't go to their normal expert because they work for a big firm and they're conflicted. Where here I'm at a little 2-person, 3-person office, so typically I'm not conflicted virtually ever. Once in a while, but not most of the time we're not. And so that can dictate, where these big federal cases go. So that's why all of a sudden I've seen, I think, an uptick in the federal cases, because there's been so much consolidation in the environmental water resources world that they are getting, they might never work for that group, but the group they just got bought by did a lot of work with them. So now they can't be an expert for them.
Right. Do you find that it's kind of a small group of you that are where you're running into the same folks being retained that are opposing you?
Well, as another thing, I talk to people about hydrogeology and geology. It's a huge field, but we're all know each other. And as soon as you get to the level of experts, you kind of know everybody too. There's always some new people, which is great. There's some people retiring, which is great. But generally speaking, at least we've heard of everybody. We know each other, kind of know where people are coming from. And so it's fairly small. And it's certainly not necessarily getting bigger. There's a huge, tremendous amount of people retiring right now. A
Yes.
lot of experts in the water environmental thing are reaching that late 60s, early 70s, and basically are, starting to slow down or just really retiring.
Sure. Now, do you also find that you work a lot by referrals through clients have already retained you, or do you do a lot of new business?
There again, it's one of those strange things. When we first did that first case, that main case I did in California federal court, I thought that the lawyers, would see how great a job I did and would try to grab me for everything and put me up for everything. That really wasn't the case. Now, there are some lawyers I have that over time have gotten to know me, and anytime they have anything, they immediately just call me and just retain me. Some of the bigger law firms are now starting to share my experience, which I was told should never happen, because if you're good, they don't want to share your name with someone else because you may be against them someday. But like the plaintiff side of things, there's a couple plaintiff groups out there that keep kind of pointing towards me. I can't always help them, but at least pointing me out there. And so probably less than half is new stuff every year. I guess I should probably ask them more often how they found me. It just never was any of those things I cared about too much. More importantly is, what can I do to help you? But yeah, there's the referral the more you do this and the longer you're in it, I guess the more referrals you're going to see.
Sure.
Also, some of the people I know retiring are going, hey, they're getting calls and they go, no, I don't do that anymore. Call up Dr. Laton.
Yeah. How about, let's just talk a little bit more about maybe depositions and the expert report. Are there ways to prepare to write the best report?
The biggest thing I've learned is you can't look at enough documents. I know that the lawyers, it's cost money for me to review all these things. And so I have a person in my firm that reviews them first and then tries to narrow that down for me. But if I'm going to make an opinion or opine upon something, I got to understand what the problem is and all the data that goes into it. And once you get that expert report out, really then for the deposition for federal court is really going to be based upon what is written in that. They can ask you other things, but really what you've written is supposed to be the only thing you can testify on. And so what it amounts to is they are going to go through that and try to see if there's any holes in it, or if their expert has, things that say, hey, you know what, we came with a different answer. How did they come up with this one? It isn't so much a gotcha moment. What they're trying to do is just understand how you got to that answer. Then they can go back and say, okay, you didn't do it right or something else. But the prep work comes down to me is rereading my expert report, going back to some of the base documents that I counted on for some of the key arguments within that report and making sure I remember those. The other good advice I was told and still told is it's not a memorization. You don't have to memorize things. If you need a second to look something up, do it. And that's really how now I've gone back to the deposition. Before I try to memorize everything. You just don't do that anymore. It's just too much. especially in these big cases. So now it's really understanding what my report is, how I got to those answers in the report, the backup material, the key backup material for that report, and just keep reviewing that and then go into the deposition, bringing my expert report with me. Some lawyers don't like that. It's fine. I'll do it without it, but then I expect the other side's going to give me a copy of my expert report, so I can at least go through it and say, okay, on page 12, this is where I explain that. The expert report itself can take on a life of its own. And what I mean by that is you start off as an expert in, groundwater modeling. But in that, you got to do a little bit of geology, a little bit of hydrogeology, a little bit of surface water, a little bit of meteorology. And there may be other experts which are doing those specialties. But you got to understand all that and take some of that into account and do some of yourself. And so one of the things that ends up happening is you end up seeing yourself going a little bit further than maybe you thought you should. But I've also had it happen the other way. I've done the report and they go, oh, by the way, we need you to do this too. Okay, great. There's another chapter's got to go into it. I find that I want to try to attack the expert report early on, so I'm not down to the last hour. Now, there's going to be changes. There's going to be things you're going to do in federal court. Chances are there's no discovery as far as reviews or any edits or anything like that. It's just your final report. Or in state court, all of that counts. But it's really trying to go through and make sure that the words are what you want them to be. And there again, words for expert may mean something different than the legal side of things. So you got, I've read enough expert reports on that. So there's some things now I look for more likely than not, the term that everyone uses. But you really got to get all that data in. And I just am a big believer, you got to look at the bigger picture before you can dive into the little details. It may not all go into the report, but you got to look at it from a 20,000 foot elevation, get down to 5,000, then finally get down to the foot. Because all of that has a role, because it may be there again, from a contamination standpoint, it may be one person, but it may be 10 different groups that are polluting the area. Okay. The lawyers may only care about one, but you got to compare about them all, because if they're all polluting, where's their pollution going? How's that interact with your pollution? Or water resources. There again, it's great this person has a lot of water resources, but maybe they're stealing from Peter to pay Paul. And so you really kind of go through that from the expert report before you get to that deposition. And like I said, that's really where everything comes in at.
Sure. Well, how about we end it with any stories or anything that were like learning moments for you, either during the trial or through the whole process, that were the aha moments for you?
Well, I'll give one quick one, and that is it was a flooding case in California, and I was defending some landowner that from something. Anyway, so I'm sitting there in the waiting room waiting to go in for my deposition, and the opposing lawyer comes out. I didn't know he was the opposing lawyer at that point in time. And he comes over and says, "Who are you?" And I say, "I'm Dr. Laton. I'm just waiting for my deposition." And so he shakes my hand, and he walks over, picks up the phone, calls somebody, walks back in the room, and 2 minutes later they come out and say, "Okay, you're done." So it's settled right then and there as I'm waiting in the waiting room to go in for my deposition. Now, I was in a deposition this last January where I'm in the middle of the deposition, and finally someone breaks into the Zoom, because now we're doing them on Zoom, which is great, and goes, "Okay, we're done. We settled." Then I had one a while back where 10 minutes into the deposition, someone comes on and says, "Okay, the judge has ruled on something that moved the deadline for deposition, so we're going to postpone your deposition." Well, what was interesting to my standpoint is that's fine. I didn't really care, but the lawyers had to argue for about 35 minutes. Well, I'm sitting there going, "Okay, do I stay on? Do I leave? Do I stay on? What do I do?" They're just arguing about what's happening and all this stuff had nothing to do with me. And so there was kind of you got to be ready for anything almost to happen. Sometimes it's comical. Sometimes obviously it's dead serious, but there's things that are just going to happen. People bringing out pieces of paper and forgetting that they had their notes on it when they hand it to me. I'm like, well, this is not my notes; these are yours. Things are going to happen because we're humans.
Right.
You got to keep it professional, slow down, listen to the question, answer the question. But there again, if things are going to happen, so you got to be flexible.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, Discussions at Roundtable. Our show notes are available on our website, roundtablegroup.com. Subscribe today on Apple Podcast or your favorite listening apps.